Hello everyone, this is the second video on the law of contracts, and before moving forward with the contents of this video, I would just like to take 2 minutes of your time to revise what I covered in the last video. So in the first video what I covered was the introduction to contracts in general and what do contracts mean and what relevance do they hold from the point of view of an individual's day-to-day life. After which, I talked about the need for the Indian Contract Act and why was the legislation needed for contracts to be in place. And then I talked about this arrangement of sections in the Indian Contract Act. And before ending the video, I talked about an explanation relating to Section 1 of the Indian Contract Act. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about a section which is of utmost importance to not only the Indian Contract Act but to any legislation possible. So if you pick up any legislation, in 9 out of 10 legislations you would find a clause that defines the terms used in the act. A clause that tells you about what do different terms mean. Now the reason for this is simple. Just like there's a lock, it would not open without a key. So similarly, the act or a legislation has certain exact words which have an exact meaning. And without describing and without elaborating about what those meanings are and what the meanings of various words are, it would be extremely difficult for the framers or the makers of the law to communicate what their intentions are. So today, if I go to a restaurant and I want to have some Chinese food, but what exactly do I want to have in the Chinese food? So if I go there, I place an order saying that I want some Chinese food. No one would be able to understand what kind of food I want to eat, what exactly is the dish I want to eat. Until and unless I say that yes, I want to have noodles, I want to have paneer chili, I want to have a specific dish, then they would take my order and fulfill my want of eating Chinese. Similarly, the makers of a legislation want to communicate certain things to the people through this legislation. But if they do not describe, if they do not tell us about what do different words mean, what do they mean by a word when it has been written in the act, it would be extremely difficult for the people to understand. Because if today talk about the word agreement or talk about the word contract itself, if you go to two people randomly on the road and ask them what a contract means, I can guarantee that both of them would have certain variations in their answer. No one would have a very exact answer because these kind of words and various words have different meanings. So it is extremely essential for an interpretation clause to be in place, because through an interpretation clause, the framers of the law give us an impression and give us a scope on how to interpret a particular thing. So today I would be talking about what a contract means from the point of view of the Indian Contract Act. Now, Section 2 of the Indian Contract Act talks about the interpretation clause, which gives us the definitions of various words used in the act and how exactly do we need to understand them. First of all, before reading this very clause line by line, because if I do so, no one would understand a single word. And the moment I start reading the first section, you would just switch this video off and go towards any other video to get a clearer understanding. So it is not a correct way to simply read the entire thing and think that the others have understood. So in my opinion, first of all, we need to talk about what a contract means from the point of view of the Indian Contract Act. For that, we need to refer to Section 2. This says that a contract is an agreement enforceable by the law, or an agreement enforceable by the law is a contract. So if I talk about what the Indian Contract Act tells us when it says a contract is, It says that an agreement enforceable by law is a contract. Now, this very definition of a contract is first of all essential because of two reasons. First of all, whenever the Act use the term contract, we need to be sure about what the concept is when a contract is being talked about and how exactly do we need to understand that particular term. And secondly, if a particular transaction or a particular definition or a particular instrument does not come under the definition of a contract, the Indian Contract Act would not be applicable to it. So if the requirements which are needed by this definition are not fulfilled, the Indian Contract Act would not be applicable in the first place. So talking about this definition, first of all, a contract is an agreement and it is enforceable by law. So talking about the Indian Contract Act and the definition of it, there are two important parts which we need to understand. First part is that it is an agreement and the second part is that it is enforceable by the law. Now the moment I said this, various questions must be popping up in your head regarding what exactly does an agreement mean and what exactly does enforceable by law mean. So in order to understand what does an agreement mean and what is the meaning of the term enforceable by law, first of all, we need to break this down into small bits in order to understand the very concept of it. So before talking about anything else, I just wanted to talk about what an agreement is. Now, if we talk about our general understanding, an agreement is a very different thing. An agreement would simply mean that when the other person says yes, I say yes, it becomes an agreement. That is the point of view from the layman language. That is the point of view of a day-to-day life, a day-to-day understanding. But when we talk about the Indian Contract Act, the meaning of agreement has a concept in itself, which we have to understand before understanding any other thing. So if I want to ask the Indian Contract Act that what exactly does agreement mean, then the Indian Contract Act would tell me that go to section 2 again. I went towards section 2 again and here I find the meaning of agreement. This is where they define an agreement. So they say that every promise and every set of promises forming consideration for each other is an agreement. Now, the moment I say this, confusion in your mind would be at a all-time high. Because, first of all, every promise, set of promises, forming consideration. So, before talking about the technical aspect of it, in order to understand an agreement, we need to understand these two concepts first. So in order to understand these two concepts, I wanted to take an example. This is the first example. So let us suppose today I decide that I wanted to get a table constructed. So this is me and this is a carpenter. This is me and this is a carpenter. Now I went towards the carpenter and I told him that, sir, I wanted to get a table made. Would you make a table for me? And the carpenter says, yes, I would make a table for you. Now this transaction is quite familiar to us in our day-to-day lives because somewhere or the other we enter into such transactions. If we want to buy something, we ask similar questions. If we want a service to be delivered to us, we ask similar questions. But from the point of view of the Indian Contract Act, the perception is quite different. The Indian Contract Act breaks this down into three parts. So first of all, let me write down the exact conversation that took place. First of all, I went to him and I told him that, sir, I wanted to get a table made. Then I asked him, would you make a table for me? And then he replies by saying that yes, I would make a table for you. Now the Contract Act sees this as different events. First of all, what I did, I went to him and I told him that I wanted to get a table made. So can I say that I actually expressed my willingness to get a table made? I expressed my willingness to the carpenter to get a table made. And after that, I asked him, would you make a table for me? So after expressing my willingness, I asked him that would he make a table for me. Now, why did you think I asked this question? Why exactly do you think I asked this question? Can I say that I asked him this question because I want him to say yes? Why else would I ask him a question? I asked him this question because I want him to say yes. I want him to say that yes, I would make a table for you. Therefore, can I say that I expressed my willingness to that particular person with a view to obtaining or with a view to obtain his assent? Now, what is the meaning of assent? Let me use the word yes as of now. Not a technical language, but yes. With a view to obtain yes as an answer from him. Generally, why else do we ask him a question, right? If I go to a shop and I ask the other person, sir, do you have a television set with you? So obviously I ask him because I want an answer is yes, because I want to buy that. Therefore, I expressed my willingness to that other person with a view to obtain a yes from him. So the Contract Act tells me that when you do this, when you as a person initiate this, these two things, meaning thereby, when I express my willingness with a view to obtain a yes from the other person, then the Contract Act tells me that I have made a proposal. And proposal is the first step towards an agreement, and an agreement is the first step towards a contract. So before concluding anything to be an agreement, we need to conclude whether there has been a proposal in it or not. So according to the Indian Contract Act, a proposal is when a person expresses his willingness with a view to obtain the yes of another person. Now, for those who did not understand this, I would like to take one more example. So let me talk about another situation. Example number 2, where I am an architect. Looking at my drawing, I can never be an architect, but still, let's say I am an architect and there's this person called A. So this is me. I'm an architect, and this is a person whose name is A. Now I want to build a house for someone. So I have that particular skill, to build a house for someone. So I go to A and I tell him that I saw your house. Well, if you want, I can make a good house for you. So I told A that I want to build a house for you. And then A tells me, I'm sorry, I told A that I want to build a house for you. And then I tell him, and then I ask him, would you let me build a house for you? To which A would reply that yes, I want you to build a house for me. I want you to build a house for me. So in this case, again, let us talk about how the Indian Contract Act sees this. First of all, I went to A. I expressed my willingness. Then I asked him a question. With a view or with an intention to obtain a yes from him. To obtain a yes from him. Even in this case, the Indian Contract Act says that once you've done this, then you have made a proposal. And where does the Indian Contract Act says this? It says this in section 2 itself. This is where the Indian Contract Act tells me. So, when one person signifies to the another his willingness to do or to abstain from doing anything, now let us first understand these four parts. In our first example, what happened? It was me. So this one person in this case is me. So let me just write it down here. So this is our first example itself. So first of all, when one person, so who is this one person? It's me. Who is the another person? He's the carpenter. And what is the meaning of signify? Signify means I've expressed. I've expressed in clear terms. So I've signified my willingness. I've signified my willingness to get a table made. And why have I signified my willingness? I have signified my willingness with a view to obtaining assent from the carpenter. an assent from the carpenter. Therefore, going back to the definition, when one person signifies to the another his willingness to do, let us for the time being leave this part, to abstain from doing. I'll come to this in the next example. To do something with a view to obtaining an assent of that such act, he is said to make a proposal. This is what the Indian Contract Act says. Talking about a second example, so this was me as an architect. I signified my willingness. So I was the one person, he was the another person, A was the another person, and I signified my willingness towards A to build a house for him. By the way, I'm really sorry for my handwriting. So I signified my willingness to him to build a house for him with a view to obtaining his assent. Therefore, I have made a proposal to him. Now, there was one more part in this definition which talked about abstain from doing. Now, what is the meaning of abstain from doing? The meaning of abstain is to restrain someone or to prevent someone. So, if I do not want some person to do an act, even then I can request him to not do an act. So, for example, I live in a crowded street. This is my house. And right next to my house, there's a factory. So here, there's a factory. So if this is my house, and this is a factory. Now, this factory owner starts his machines, which are extremely noisy, at 3 a.m. in the morning. And at that point, the entire noise comes inside my house and I'm unable to sleep. So one day I went to the factory owner and I told him that I don't want you to start your machines at 3 a.m. What did I tell him? I don't want you to start your machines at 3 a.m. in the morning. Then I asked him, would you please stop starting your machines at 3 p.m.? And then the factory owner understands and then he says, yes, I will not start my machines at 3 p.m. In this case as well, I have expressed my willingness with a view to obtaining the assent of that person. So first of all, I've expressed my willingness for the factory owner to stop doing an act, to refrain from doing an act. And I want him to give his assent. I want him to say, yes, I would not do this. So with a view to obtaining an assent, So this very case, according to the Indian Contract Act, is that of proposal in which I have asked the other person to abstain from doing an act. In this, I have abstained him from starting his machines at 3 a.m. I'm sorry, this is a.m. 3 a.m. in the morning. So now let us go towards the definition. When it tells us that when one or more person signifies to another, when one person signifies to another his willingness to do or abstain from doing with a view to obtaining the assent of such other to such act or abstinence, he is said to make a proposal. I hope the meaning of proposal is quite clear. Now, assuming that the meaning of proposal is clear, I would like to go towards the meaning of a promise. Now, what is the meaning of a promise? Once again, promise according to the different people means a different thing. If I ask two people on the road what does promise mean, they would have a different answer. Both of them are likely to have different answers. So again, I go towards section 2. I ask section 2, please help me when the act says about something called a promise. Tell me what a promise means. Then the act tells me, don't worry, this is section 2 and this is where I define a promise. So the act tells me that when the person to whom the proposal is made signifies his assent thereto, the proposal is said to have been accepted. Now moving to the three examples which we took. First example, I expressed my willingness to him to get a table made and then he gave a yes, assent in this case. For a simpler understanding, we can say that assent means when the other person says yes for the time being. So I expressed my willingness with a view to obtaining the assent of that other person, with a view to obtaining a yes from that other person. And when that other person says yes, he accepts my proposal. So for example, here I expressed my willingness to obtain a yes from him. I made a proposal, and when he expressed, the other person accepts my proposal, then that proposal has been accepted. And the Indian Contract Act says that once a proposal is accepted, it becomes a promise. So in this case, I go to the carpenter, signify my willingness with a view to obtaining an assent from the carpenter. And once the carpenter says, yes, I would make a table for you, then the carpenter has promised me that yes, he would make a table for me. This is what the Indian Contract Act says with respect to a proposal and a promise. The content of this video was to explain the concepts of proposal and promise, and I hope I have been able to communicate my understanding with respect to what a proposal and what a promise is. Now in the next video, I would be talking about the definition of an agreement and it being enforceable by law. Thank you so much for watching.